So in the last episode of What is Non-Duality, I talked about free will and choice. In this episode, I want to talk about something which often sounds to the mind very, very challenging. I want to talk about time and space and how sometimes you may hear non-duality speakers, you may read in books about non-duality that there is no such thing as time and space. I want to try to explain what to the mind seems a kind of obviously nonsensical statement. So the first thing I want to say is that there's nothing philosophical here, really, that when it's said that there is no time and space, it's simply an attempt to explain a perception. It's simply an attempt to explain what is experienced when this, by which I mean whatever's happening, I'm not going to make any distinction now between the internal and external world, but to say that there is no time and space is an attempt to explain this, or to describe this rather, when it's seen without a person seeing it, when it's seen without the self getting in the way. And the reorientation towards time and space can occur even if there has just been a split second of awakening. In just a split second of awakening can leave the character who remains when that split second is over. Notice how I have to use time-based phrases to describe this. That character can be left simply with the stunning recognition that time and space do not exist, or if you like, we could say that time and space are an illusion. Let's start with time. In awakening, it's seen that all there is this. All there is whatever is happening in a timeless, and I want to add here the word moment because we have to use some kind of language, but we see already how hopeless that is because, of course, moment is a time-based word. How long is a moment, we might ask? A moment must have duration. A moment must have a beginning and an end. So even that word is inadequate to describe what is seen when it's realized that time does not exist. And that's why quite often you may hear or read non-duality communicators say, all there is this. This is not even a moment. This has no beginning, middle, and end, to be followed by another moment with a middle, a beginning, and end, thus constructing time. Okay, so there's no way to understand this philosophically. In a way, we could say about this that this reality is either seen or if it's not seen. If it's not seen and an interest arises in the mind about it, then it may be taken on trust or it may be rejected. And of course, it doesn't matter which. Nevertheless, in that split second of awakening that may happen, it's realized that there is simply this, that this is timeless. This is, if you like, eternal, where eternal does not mean lasting for a very long time, but where eternal means outside time. This, seen without the mind seeing it, is eternity, is outside time. It is the mind. It's only when it is the mind that seems to be seeing this that time is constructed. We might ask, well, what importance does this have? To which the answer might be, well, none whatsoever. It absolutely doesn't matter. There's no suggestion here that any of what is being said here has any importance. all we're trying to describe really is something that is seen or it's not seen, and there may be an interest in it, or there may not be an interest in it, and it really doesn't matter which. Nevertheless, I'm going to comment a little bit further about time, because what's often noticed when there has been an awakening is that the orientation of the one who is left, the person, if you like, the individual, the character, the divine puppet, the orientation of that person to their own personal history, which of course seems to exist in time, that orientation is often radically changed. And of course, my personal relationship with time consists of some awareness of the past and events that appear to have happened in the past, and my relationship with the future and perhaps my hopes and fears and apprehensions about the future. So I'm going to say a little bit about this, again, merely as a matter of description. So as a matter of description, when there's been an awakening, often what happens in terms of the experience of the past is we could say that in a way, the reality of that experience simply collapses. So the past seems to have no reality anymore. Now, I don't mean by that in any sense that events from the past, from the personal past, as it seems, are forgotten, that they disappear. I'm not describing here some kind of radical amnesia or some sudden onset of dementia whereby the personal story has been forgotten. What we could say after awakening is that often what happens is, of course, all the autobiographical information remains intact. I can still remember what primary school I apparently went to when I was 6 years old, but we could say the juice goes out of it, the energy goes out of it, so that it appears much less real, we could say. And if the past has been troubling us in our memory, then the extent to which it's been troubling us is also likely to lose a lot of juice and again become much less real. An image that I've used, or a metaphor that I've used to describe this, is that we could say that for a person, one who feels themselves to be real, one who feels themselves to have choice and responsibility, for a person, we could say that their memory of the past is like a three-dimensional model, by which I mean it has a kind of reality to it, whereby, well, for example, if my past is a three-dimensional model, that in a way I can get inside it and I can run around in it. And that, of course, is what many of us do and are tempted to do quite a lot with our past. We're tempted quite a lot to revisit our past, to run around in it, to look at it, to examine it, and to experience all kinds of emotions connected with it. Some of these emotions might be delightful, like memories of happiness and nostalgia, which can to some extent be pleasurable. And of course, as we all know, or as many of us know, a lot of these emotions associated with the past can be really extremely troubling indeed. So those feelings, as I run around and revisit the reality of my past as it appears to be, there may be feelings of guilt, there may be feelings of regret, there may be feelings of loss, there may be feelings of pain, and there may be a lot of what ifs and if onlys connected to these memories. Oh, if only I hadn't said that, if only I hadn't done that, what if I had done this or said this or married this person rather than that person. It's pretty natural for the one who seems to be a person, who feels himself to be a person, to have a lot of trouble with the past, some of us more than others. So the suggestion from here is that even a split second of awakening can radically alter our perception of the past and the experience of the past. And to continue the metaphor, what I'm going to say now is that the three-dimensional model that seemed to have so much reality to it for some of us may suddenly, after awakening, collapse into what I would describe as a two-dimensional picture. So instead of a three-dimensional model that we can run around in, there may now be a two-dimensional picture which we can look at but not get into and not be tempted to get into. Now, the point about a two-dimensional picture is that all the information is still there in it. So, as I've said, this is not amnesia. I can still remember the name of the school I went to. But the point about a two-dimensional picture is you can't, well, certainly you can't so easily get into it and run around in it. You may be able to do that with a force of your imagination, but the desire to do that will probably have gone. So all the information is still there, but the kind of the emotional charge of it will probably have disappeared or greatly reduced. This is why we often say that even with, a moment of awakening, there are certain common feelings which may simply disappear and not reappear. For example, guilt, regret, and nostalgia, which all, of course, belong to the past. As long as the past seems real, it's very possible and very likely that I might experience these. But when it becomes apparent that the past is unreal, it's very much less likely that I'm going to experience nostalgia, regret, or guilt, although it's still possible that they may arise occasionally, simply perhaps just as a bad habit, we could say. So one thing we can say clearly is that probably when awakening occurs, there'll be a radical realignment of the relationship between the apparent individual, the divine puppet, if we want to use that term, and what seemed to be up to that moment their personal past, and is now perhaps we could say simply experienced as a story. Okay, so I want to move on to the second part of this mystery and this mysterious communication, which is quite often made by non-duality speakers and writers such as myself. And that is that there is also, there's no time. That's pretty puzzling. Well, there's also no space. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on this. Again, it's impossible for the mind to get this. It's impossible for it to work it out, to apprehend it, really completely impossible. However, again, I'm going to assert that even a split second of awakening may well give rise to the direct realization or the direct apprehension that also space is a kind of illusion. So what I'm going to assert, and I know that many people listening to this or watching this will know this from direct experience, what I'm going to assert is that, again, even in a split second of awakening, after which the person may come back almost fully formed, there is the recognition that because I do not exist in this, therefore there is no space. Space is created by the illusion or by the appearance that I exist. Again, I'm pointing very, very consciously to myself as a person, as a physical person sitting here. Space, the idea of space, the sense of space, is created by the apprehension or the feeling that I as a person exist. I as a person exist in this body, And this body exists, in this particular case, in this room. This room is the space in which this body exists and moves. If that sense of the person being real drops away even for a split second, then it is seen that awareness, and I'm going to use this rather tricky word awareness here, we might come back to it later in another episode, then it's seen that awareness is not in any sense constructed here or localized here. Awareness is simply everywhere. Everywhere in this room is equally awareness. And so we could say that because awareness is everywhere, therefore there is no everywhere. There is simply this. We can't even say there is this space which somehow awareness fills, because if awareness is everywhere, there is no space. What creates the appearance of space is that awareness seems localized in one particular place, and outside awareness there seem to be other places. The assertion from here, therefore, is that, as I've said, even with a split second of seeing, it's recognized that because awareness is everywhere, it makes just as much sense to say it is nowhere, and there is nowhere for it to be because there is no space. We could simply say that awareness is. It's even going a little too far to say awareness exists. Awareness simply is. So I don't know. I feel like I want to say at this point, I'm coming to the end of this particular episode, and I feel like I want to say at this point, I don't know if that's been any help in the sense of helping to understand or get a picture of or get a handle of what's being spoken here. As usual, as many non-duality speakers say and write, and as I say and write, this is either seen or it isn't seen. And when it's seen, really, there's no need anymore for language to describe it. And when it isn't seen, describing it in language and listening to language describing it is absolutely hopeless. So we might perhaps just remind ourselves again at the end of this episode as to, why do we bother to do this? Why do we bother to talk about non-duality and write about it? Why do we bother to listen to talks on non-duality and read books about it? Why do we bother to hang out with other people who are into non-duality? Simply for the joy of it, simply because something in us arises at some point which draws us to this message, which draws us to this communication. It's quite hopeless. The mind will never get this. And of all the different topics that we might choose to tackle when we're talking about non-duality, the topics of the non-existence of time and space are probably amongst the most difficult. But anyway, we have had a go at it this evening, and I'm going to leave it at that, end this episode. There'll be another one coming along in a little while. But for now, I'll just leave you with that reminder that seeing non-duality is not just seeing that there is no self, that there is no person. It's also the recognition that the personal story is not a personal story. It is simply a story. And there is no time in which it unfolded, and there is no space in which the person dwells.